next panel, let's just take a quick instant poll. How many of you sitting in this audience feel more or less confident, let's say more confident now than before you came in? Let's see a show of hands. How many are feeling less confident about the future of the Republic than before when you came in? Definitely more hands. Who's ready for a drink in about an hour and a half? Excellent. We'll definitely serve them up.
The only thing she's got going is the woman's card.
Donald thinks belittling women makes him bigger.
Nobody has more respect for women than I do. Nobody. Nobody has more respect.
Please, everybody.
When Mexico sends its people, they're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, they're rapists.
Race remains a significant challenge in our country.
We have to bring back law and order.
Donald started his career being sued by the Justice Department for racial discrimination.
You were the one that brought up the word super predator about young black youth.
We see all this, and it's hard not to think sometimes that the center won't hold. We must reject such despair.
Hi, everybody. Hey, guys. I'm James Bennett. I'm the editorial page editor at the Times, and I'm here with Yamiche Alcindor, who is presidential campaign correspondent and has been out on the trail for probably what seems like forever, and Maureen Dowd, the op-ed columnist for the New York Times. And actually, before we plunge in, I'm kind of curious, like, as the pageant of democracy is unfolding around us today, are you guys relieved that it's over, or are you kind of sorry, speaking as journalists and not as citizens, that the campaign's coming to an end?
I've already started filling my calendar with news stories to write because I'm just clearly addicted to not sleeping. But I'm in some ways it is in some ways feeling like summer camp. The embeds have been saying it's like summer camp is ending, and I think that's probably how a lot of people are feeling, that this was a historic moment and it was amazing even if it was exhausting. So yeah, I think it's kind of sad to see it end.
As journalists, you have a split personality. You think about what is the good story, and often that's the opposite of what is good for the country or good for a person. So you're always kind of torn. And a lot of the younger reporters have been saying they can't wait for this to end and they can get off and to more normal political stories, but those reporters didn't have to spend a year talking to Michael Dukakis about the book he was reading, which was Swedish land use planning.
I remember those days. Well, we're here to talk about race and gender in this campaign. And I'd like to get to the question of what this national conversation or shouting match has kind of revealed about us as a society, but why don't we start with the candidates and their messages. And Yamiche, we've been having kind of a running discussion on the editorial board over the last couple of months about how much Trump supporters are responding to his appeals about economic anxiety and how much they're really just responding to the coded or not so coded messages about immigrants, the inner city, and African Americans, about women. And I wonder what your take has been based on the time you've actually spent interviewing voters in the field.
So I've interviewed dozens of Trump supporters and gone to a lot of different rallies all over the country. And I think it's probably, in my anecdotal sense, it's probably 60-40, 60% of them. I think 60% of Trump supporters really are talking about the anxiety of the economy. They see President Obama releasing these monthly job reports, but in rural Pennsylvania or in Iowa, they see that they're not being able to really provide for their families, and that's really given them a lot of anxiety. And it's also, they're looking at the lives that their grandfathers or their fathers led and saying, I can't go get that union job, I can't go be a coal miner like my dad, and that's really, really something that's upsetting to them. So you can, in some ways, talk to those voters and understand, oh, this is why someone is voting for Donald Trump. On the flip side, I think I've also had conversations like one time I was in West Bend, Wisconsin, which is 95% white and 1% black, and this man was telling me that there are too many African Americans living in the town, and that black people don't like to work, and that black women just want to get pregnant, and they want to just go on welfare. And he was saying this to me, and I'm looking at him thinking, oh, I'm a working black woman, okay? But in my mind, I remember also thinking that, like, you know, as a journalist, you're supposed to have this kind of, you know, you're supposed to just like be divorced from the topic. So most of the times I can do that, but I would say that there was another time where this guy, I was talking to him and he was saying that African Americans, that, you know, look at you, you're a black woman who works for the New York Times, like your parents didn't even go to college. And I had to stop him and say, no, both my parents have PhDs actually. and to me, that was like uncomfortable because I was like, oh God, you're not supposed to do that. But I also was like, you're not going to talk about my mother. Like, I can't be here in this moment. So I think that, like, but there's a lot of that I've also found on the trail. So I would definitely say it's about 60-40.
Maureen, you've interviewed Donald Trump probably as many times as any journalist, and you've watched him over the years. You were nice enough to take me to lunch with him a couple months ago. You wrote over the weekend that he kind of created a character for himself in the primaries and found himself playing that character all the way through the general. I just wonder, how much does this character map to the Donald Trump that you've interviewed over the years? I mean, the way he has talked about women, responded to the challenge of Hillary Clinton, the way he's talked about immigrants and other groups.
Well, when he first got to Manhattan from Queens and Brooklyn, where his father's real estate real estate firm was based, he started hanging out at Yankee Stadium with George Steinbrenner and Roy Cohn and Lee Iacocca, and Cary Grant would drop by, and he decided to be this larger-than-life, swaggering figure like these guys, and he modeled himself. And there was some other guy who was a furrier to the stars, and another guy who was the limousine king. So he created this larger-than-life character, which he used to build his brand. And then when he got on the campaign trail, he sort of created this other character because it started with the birther thing, and then he got, you know, the roar of a certain type of crowd from that. And then he followed that roar when he got on the campaign trail, and it took him, as you know, to a lot of very dark, horrible places. And, you know, so at the beginning, reporters in the Washington Bureau, for instance, were saying, well, at least he doesn't mean it, like Ted Cruz. So it's better. But then as it went along, you realized it was worse because he didn't mean it. And he was creating all of this violence and bigotry without even meaning it. So, you know, everything just got darker and darker. And some of the people who knew him over the years with The Apprentice were kind of curious. What if he was going to create a character, why not create like the boss on The Apprentice? But he really is in the moment just trying to win. He has no other values except winning. And so when he would hear the crowd, he would just follow it, and the crowd was taking him to these bad places. But his character really couldn't survive the fact that he, you know, he sort of had this, the first time we've ever seen a psychological meltdown during the campaign because he couldn't, you know, deal with it in terms of his ego when he, you know, and Hillary had a team of psychologists, so it was very easy for her to figure out how to goad him. So if she goaded him about how he was a spoiled little rich boy and his daddy gave him the money, he just couldn't get that out of his head. Or when she goaded him about Miss Universe, he couldn't get it out of his head. He couldn't let it go. So at 3 in the morning, he's up tweeting about it. So he really couldn't even stay in the horrible character he created because, you know, all of his ego issues and, as Frank said, fear of humiliation kind of came to the fore.
Let me switch to Hillary Clinton. How much of the resistance to her do you think is because she is a woman, and how much just because she's Hillary Clinton?
Well, it's funny because I first started covering politics for the Times. I went out with Geraldine Ferraro for several weeks, and I was rereading my stories about her, and she, she really had a rough time from Democrats because we would go to a campaign event, and the Democratic official on the scene would give her a wrist corsage, as though they were going to the prom. And then this other guy, the head of the 70-year-old head of the agriculture department in Mississippi, gave her, he said to her, he called her young lady and said, young lady, do you know how to bake blueberry muffins? So, compared to what Hillary has had to go through, and I was telling James, I mean, to me, and I mean this as a compliment, Hillary is beyond gender. I know that President Obama the other day said men should look in their hearts and realize that, they have these sexist feelings and accept them and vote for Hillary. But I really think, and of course there's sexism. If you ever look at a YouTube rally of Donald Trump, the scroll next to it makes you want to throw up. But I do think that to a large extent, the people who don't like her because I have a double negative here. It's not because she's a woman, it's more because of her own track record. And she's flipped what usually happens with women. With the first woman up for being president, you would think that her problem would be that we'd be worried that she's not tough enough. But no one worries about that with her. And Donald Trump hasn't even tried to attack her on that because everyone knows she's tough enough. That isn't an issue with her. What the issue is usually, like with women, they usually get something called a virtue advantage where people tend to think they're more honest, women politicians, and that's what she doesn't have. So that's interesting.
Yamiche, what do you think? I mean, she had to work pretty hard early on, particularly with young women, African American voters, to try to energize them.
Well, I've found, and I've been pretty surprised by the number of young men. It's only happened a couple of times, but I've had young men, and most of them actually, they were African American men who told me, well, I wouldn't vote for her because she was a woman. And they were like my age, they were like in their 20s and 30s, and I was like, wait, come again? Like,
Did you tell them your mother was a woman?
Right. But I said, did I really hear that? And they were Bernie Sanders supporters, so these are not hardcore some Trump supporters. They were at this point when I was hearing most of this backlash, it was from men that were supporting Bernie Sanders. So I think there was a bit of that from the Bernie bros and even young men that they thought that a woman they had never seen, that a woman had never been president of the United States, and that's just not something that they would think is possible.
Do you think, something I've been wondering about is whether in the end this campaign is going to have turned out to be good or bad for us? I mean, do you think of it as having awakened all our demons, or do you think it started a process of getting us to talk more openly about them and maybe begin exercising them?
I think for me, and I think for a lot of African Americans, this election is some ways good for us. It's good for us to remember that America was founded on this ideal of racism. It's good for us to remember that half, or at least a portion of our population came on the bottom of boats. Because I think that so many times we forget that. We think that we have an African-American president, so that means that we've somehow entered this post-racial society. I can be an African-American working for the New York Times, so all African-Americans should be able to be prosperous, and that's just not true. And I think that Black Lives Matter and all these different statistics, the DOJ has told us over and over again that policing is something that is definitely discriminatory. It's not at all something that's up for debate. So I think that a lot of times I wrote a story about the Trump tapes and the idea that he had insulted so many other groups. He had insulted Mexicans and Muslims and women and veterans and Gold Star families, and none of these Republicans were saying, or a lot of the Republicans weren't saying, I could see my daughter in this, I could see my mother in this. But then when he started talking about white women, it became this completely different conversation. So I think we should really own that as an American culture. And I remember pitching that story and being like, we should write about the fact that this is really because of white women. And I was nervous as a reporter to say that to my editor, but my editors were like, okay. But I think the fact that I was nervous to even say that out loud to my editors tells me that we have a lot of stuff to still wrestle with.
As unpleasant as it's been, maybe it was inevitable because it's a fusion of reality TV and politics and social media. And social media, as you guys know, is not pretty. And Leon Wieseltier, a friend of ours, compares it to a Boston bar at closing time. And, you know, so as Jim Glick, he used to be an editor here, said, running for president is the new selfie. And so we're selfie nation, and the press was used as a selfie stick by Donald Trump. So it might have been inevitable in the era of Kardashian that we'd have a Kardashian candidate like Trump. But now we've had it, so hopefully we can move on.
Do you guys think, in the limited time we've got left here, that a woman president will bear particular burdens in the way of the first black president has? Will it be scrutinized in different ways? Will have to comport themselves differently?
I think one of the things we're going to learn, especially I could say as reporters, we, I think, didn't do a good enough job of writing about the backlash that Obama had. The alt-right was organizing, all these things were happening, and we were writing stories about how much history had been made, and we weren't really paying attention to that. I think that with the first woman president, hopefully we'll pay more attention to the backlash that she gets because she's a woman.
I don't know, Glenn Thrush at Politico had a good line where he was saying about President Obama, you know, there was this backlash because he didn't look like the guy on the coins, and that we didn't pay enough attention to that. And of course, Hillary doesn't either. But I don't know, maybe I'm too much of a cockeyed optimist, but I just think after a day or so, as with President Obama with most of the country, everybody's just going to get used to it. And if they don't, they'll have to.
All right, well, it's nice to leave it on an optimistic note. Thank you guys, and congratulations on an awesome campaign.